Story 1. One night, I woke to Whiskers staring intently at the wardrobe in the guest room where I was sleeping. His tail was twitching, not playfully, but with an almost predatory focus. I flicked on the lamp. He didn't even flinch, just kept staring at the dark wood. I called him, but he ignored me. It lasted only a minute. Then he blinked, stretched, and jumped onto the bed as if nothing had happened. My heart hammered. I started checking locks multiple times before bed, even adding a chair under the doorknob of my room. The tension culminated on my last night. I was gathering my things, clearing out the guest room closet, when my hand brushed against a loose panel at the back. It wasn't merely loose. It felt like a hinge. Curiosity, a terrible foolish instinct, made me push. The panel swung inwards, revealing a narrow, dust-filled crawlspace. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze into. And it wasn't empty. There was a sleeping bag rolled up in a corner, a few empty water bottles, and a pile of discarded snack wrappers, all recent. My gaze swept across the floor, then froze on a small, worn notebook. I picked it up, my hands trembling. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. Dates, times, and brief, chilling observations. July 12th, 10:47 p.m. Lights out in bedroom. Sound of fan. July 15th, 7 a.m. Morning coffee on porch. Blue pajamas again. July 18th, 9:30 p.m. Movie night. Rom-com. Laughs too loud. My blue pajamas. My morning coffee routine. The rom-com I watched last Tuesday. Every small thing. Every misplaced item. Every creak. Every time Whiskers stared. It wasn't my imagination. Someone had been living in the walls, watching me, meticulously documenting my presence. From a tiny drilled peephole in the closet wall, straight into the guest room, into my life. I didn't finish packing. I didn't even close the panel. I just ran. Out of the house, into my car, speeding down the long private driveway without a backward glance. I called the Millers from a gas station, stammering some excuse about a family emergency. They were understanding, confused. I never told them what I found. I couldn't. Who would believe it? I still feel their eyes on me sometimes, even when I'm alone in my own apartment, knowing someone out there knows what kind of pajamas I wore on a Tuesday night in July. Story 2. The Cunninghams' place was supposed to be a reprieve. A sprawling, isolated old house nestled deep in the woods, far enough from the city to guarantee solitude. They were away for 3 weeks, and my only job was to keep the plants alive and the cat fed. Easy money, I thought. The first few days were idyllic. The quiet was a balm, the air crisp. I'd read, listen to the wind through the pines, and explore the endless nooks and crannies of the house. But by the 4th night, the silence started to feel less peaceful and more expectant. Every creak of the old house, every rustle outside, registered with an unnatural clarity. I started feeling it first in the evenings. A prickle on the back of my neck, the distinct sensation of eyes watching, even when I was entirely alone. I'd spin around, heart thudding, to an empty hallway, or a window reflecting only my own anxious face. I dismissed it as overactive imagination, a byproduct of isolation. I was a city person after all. Then small things started. A book I swore I'd left on the coffee table would be back on a shelf. The bathroom window, which I always kept slightly ajar, would be fully closed. I attributed it to my own forgetfulness, the quirks of an old house, or perhaps the cat, Mittens, though she was a lazy creature not prone to rearranging literature. My sleep became fractured. I'd wake in a cold sweat, convinced I'd heard a floorboard creak directly outside my bedroom door. I stopped listening to music, preferring the silence, hoping to catch whatever subtle sound was setting me on edge. The feeling of being watched intensified, particularly when I was in the living room, facing the large, ornate fireplace. It felt like a gaze boring into me from the shadowed mantelpiece, or perhaps from the small, unused door beside it, which I assumed led to a storage closet. On my 10th night, I woke to a sound that wasn't a creak. It was a faint, almost imperceptible click. My breath hitched. I lay frozen, listening, until the silence returned, heavier than before. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, exhaustion pushing me past fear, I found myself drawn to that small door next to the fireplace. It was locked, but the wood around the frame looked oddly newer than the rest. Running my hand along it, I felt a slight give, a loose panel. My fingers found the seam, and, with a desperate tug, the panel slid inwards, revealing a narrow, claustrophobic space. It wasn't a closet. It was a passage, barely wide enough for a person. Inside, resting on a small, dusty shelf at eye level, was a collection of objects. Not old, forgotten relics. These were familiar. My spare reading glasses, which I kept in my purse. A used tea bag from a specific herbal blend I liked, dried and carefully flattened. And, most sickeningly, a small, crudely carved wooden figure. It was me, unmistakably. Sitting, just as I often sat by the window, my legs tucked beneath me, a book in my lap. The details were chillingly accurate. The messy bun, the slight tilt of my head. It was me, observed. The passage didn't go far, just a few feet behind the wall, ending in a perfectly drilled peephole looking directly into the living room, specifically where I usually sat reading, and another, smaller one, angled towards the hallway. The Cunninghams had lied. About everything. This wasn't a job. It was a setup. I wasn't house-sitting. I was being watched. And the chilling truth settled in. The click I'd heard last night wasn't outside my door. It was the sound of the panel being carefully, silently, re-secured. I ran. I didn't pack. I didn't even lock the door. I just ran. The wooden figure's vacant eyes burned into my mind, knowing someone had been there, in that tiny dark space, watching me sleep just hours before. Knowing they'd probably seen me find it. Knowing they were still very likely there, in the house, watching me leave. Story 3. The ad was simple, almost bland. House sitter wanted. Lovely, quiet property. Generous remuneration. References required. It was exactly what I needed. A few weeks away from my cramped city apartment. A chance to earn some quick cash. Sarah, the owner, seemed perfectly nice over the phone. A bit hurried, but professional. Her house was a sprawling old Victorian on the edge of a small, nondescript town. Remote, she'd called it, but peaceful. The first few days were peaceful. Almost too peaceful. The house was filled with the hushed ticking of an antique grandfather clock and the rustle of leaves against the windows. I walked the overgrown gardens, enjoyed the silence, and settled into a comfortable routine. I'd text Sarah updates, mentioning the impeccable condition of the house, the quiet neighborhood nights. She'd reply with brief, polite acknowledgments. Then the little things started. A book I was sure I'd left on the nightstand would be on the coffee table. The kitchen lights, which I always turned off, would be faintly glowing in the morning. I dismissed it as my own forgetfulness, the disorientation of a new environment. Stress, maybe. But the feeling of being watched grew. It was a prickling on my neck when I was alone in the study, a sense of presence just beyond my peripheral vision. I started leaving doors ajar, as if that might somehow reveal the intruder. But the house remained stubbornly empty, yet undeniably occupied. I checked the locks religiously, every night. Double-checked, triple-checked. One evening, while reading in the living room, I heard a distinct thump from upstairs. Not a creak, not a settle, but a deliberate, solid sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the mantelpiece, my hands slick with sweat, and crept up the stairs. Each step seemed to echo the thumping in my chest. I moved from room to room, my breath catching in my throat. Nothing. The bedrooms were pristine, undisturbed. I returned downstairs, the candlestick feeling foolishly inadequate. The next morning, I found a single muddy footprint on the pristine white rug in the hallway. It wasn't mine. I hadn't gone outside that night, and the weather had been dry. I scrubbed it away, my hands trembling, but the image was seared into my mind. I called Sarah. Her voice on the phone was different, colder. "Are you sure about that, dear? It's a very secure house. Perhaps you're being a little Jumpy. I insisted. I detailed the footprint, the noises, the unease. There was a pause, a long, drawn-out silence that felt deliberate. "Look," she finally said, her voice tight. "I need you to be very clear. My husband, he's a bit of a wanderer. He has his own ways of feeling at home. Just ignore him. He won't hurt you. He's just there." The words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. Ignore him. He's just there. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. I'd never been alone. The house wasn't just a house. It was a stage. And I was a character in a play I didn't understand, with an audience I couldn't see. The silence of the Victorian mansion now felt suffocating, pregnant with unseen life. I was trapped, the walls closing in, and the true horror was the chilling realization that the owner knew and had deliberately handed me over.